Well, hello and welcome once again to A Goodman's Tale. My name is Joshua Goodman, and as you already know, A Goodman's Tale is a place where we can get down, talk about life's ups, downs, highs, lows, the nitty and the gritty, our greatest challenges, difficulties, hardships, those things that we have had to face that have literally just worn us out, beaten us down, broken us down, and then also our highest mountaintops. As you know, as we always ask, if you would like, subscribe, and ask other people to join us, share it. And that being said, let's go ahead and get it. All right, guys, so growing up, I grew up going to Christian school, and every morning my dad would do family devotions, and every morning as part of those family devotions my dad would read a psalm and have one of us, either me, my sister Jen or Jess, read a portion of a child's unreached people group book done by the Joshua Project, kind of opening our minds to the unreached people who were out there. So just get the picture. We're sitting around there, we're giving devotions, we're doing the proverb, and then we just begin to read about goodness sake, individuals, man, the backside of China, the jungles of South America, indigenous people groups throughout Central South America, Africa, and especially, one of the greatest places or biggest places where the most condensed number of unreached people groups are is what's called the 1040 window. And this is most of the Muslim states and places like Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, all of these places where for a lot of those individuals, believing in Jesus Christ, is illegal. Individuals are still put to death and imprisoned. Matter of fact, a good friend of mine, I can't mention his name to you, but a few years ago was arrested in China and I had actually been there and ministered with this individual in China, was arrested, put under intense questioning, hot lights, and finally, because he was an American citizen, they simply deported him back to the United States. Luckily, his commitment and resolve was just so profound that within days, he was crossing the border, he couldn't simply fly in, but walking across the border back into China and continued his ministry, which still goes on today. And I got to tell you, just kind of a moment of transparency, growing up considering these unreached people groups, right? Reading books, like Through the Gates of Splendor, Martyr of the Catacombs, watching movies like The Mission or At the End of the Spear. And if you've not read those books or seen those movies, go out and see them and you'll know why my next statement is very true. One of my desires as a young man, as a child, was to be able to give my life for the sake of the gospel, to be able to sacrifice myself for the sake of bringing the gospel to the far reaches of the world. And that really, really, really has been kind of an igniting fire for me throughout my life. My desire to go where none have gone and minister the gospel where none have ministered, share Jesus Christ to people who have never heard his name before. And like I said, movies like The Mission and At the End of the Spear, these were kind of the catalyst. Growing up in a Christian household, Christian family, with missionaries, that being my lifestyle, it always seemed like, for me growing up, the rougher the better. The harder the floor, the more difficult to travel. I can remember, and I'll share stories about this later because today's theme is Thailand and the Northern Kingdom. But man, driving 16, 18 hours, having to ruck it in and, put on a backpack and carry all of our gear, another 4 hours over rivers, over, streams and mountains, and just only to get to a little village and hold clinics where we were sleeping out under the stars and eating from open fires, and just, being able to have an impact on those who are least impacted by the gospel. For the Lord to use me to bring an impact to those people's lives. I'm glad that I've not yet been martyred because I'm happily married to my wonderful wife. I got 6 great kids, 3 great grandbabies, a wonderful church I consider to be one of the best in the world. But I got to say, if that opportunity ever faced me, I'll be honest with you, I don't know that I would be coming home from that trip. Let's jump in and talk a little bit about Thailand. I can remember traveling to Thailand, and I remember the exact year it was 2006. Early in 2006, probably around the time of February, March. And I remember this because later on in that year, around October 2006, I would run my very first marathon. It was the Marine Corps Marathon up in DC. And so during the time while I was in Thailand, during February, March of 2006, I was in the midst of intense training and, goodness sake, running every day, prepping, getting ready for this Marine Corps marathon. And we had been invited by Charlie Milbro, who had been a missionary then, probably 20 years in Thailand, and who was doing a great outreach among the unreached people group called the Karen. Now, let me kind of give you a little bit of backstory to the Karen people. One of the unreached people groups, when we would sit around the table and eat our breakfast, have our devotions, and read the Proverbs, one of the unreached people groups we really focused in on was the Karen, and we got to begin to read more about them and consider them, and we became what's called an adopting family, where we committed to pray every day for the Karen people. We committed to support in whatever way we could mission outreaches, and it just so happened that Charlie had a mission outreach to the Karen. And so today, even today, after all these years, all the ministry that's been done, still the northern tribe of the Karen, the one we were praying for, still numbers around 86,000, with only 2% having received the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, there's other Karen people groups that number, after this 86,000, over 1.5 million. Again, in the different facets of the Karen people, you'll have some that have received 1% of the, have heard 1% who have heard the gospel too, even up to 4% with some of those groups that are being closer to the city. But most of the northern groups are so far outlying into the jungles of Thailand that to reach them is just a huge challenge. And I bring up that northern group, and that's the one I specifically talk about, the one of 86,000, because that's the one that we would pray for, and that's the one in 2006 I would have the opportunity to go and minister amongst. Before we jump into that story, though, my history with Thailand, let's talk about some of the fascinating history that Thailand has. Literally, you guys got to know, right, that so many of the Asian people groups have a history, well, goodness sake, many in China predating Christ, going back not just the 2,000 years we know BC, before Christ, but going back 3, 4, 5,000 years ago. And it is from these individuals in China that places like Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, that's where their people groups come from. What I mean to say is this: many of those people groups are sub-people groups of China, and we see China having even a much older history than Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, Myanmar, these places, but still, nonetheless, when we consider the birth of our nation, we're just a couple hundred years old, where these guys literally are a couple thousand years old. So rich in art, language, culture. For me, and I'm going to share more about this later on in our talk today, just the impact that nations of this world has had upon me and how appreciative I am because of it. Like I said, before we jump into my history with Thailand, let's talk a little bit about where Thailand is in its history. So you can either Google search it, or if you got a globe at your house, find the United States of America, turn the globe all the way around to the other side, and you'll find one of the largest nations on the other side of the world is China. Now, once you locate China, follow China's landmass down, and you're going to see places, again, like Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos. And if you continue down, you'll find the nation of Thailand. And like I said, this is a place with great history. If you find, if, like I said, follow that China landmass down, you'll find places like Myanmar, which is northwest of Thailand. You'll see to the south the Andaman Sea. To the east, you'll see Laos, the PDR. To the south, you'll see, south and east, you'll find Cambodia. And directly south, of course, is the Gulf of Thailand, which is the inlet from the South China Sea. And then Thailand shares a portion of the Malay Peninsula with, well, Malaysia. And you can imagine that with all these countries, I mean, Malaysia, Cambodia, all these places surrounding Thailand, just picture this with me. You have this great migration south of individuals who are Chinese from China. And as this great migration begins to take place and people groups and tribes begin to separate and kingdoms, this is a time when kingdoms are being established, guys. Goodness sake, land wars begin, and this is my side and that's your side, and we're going to decide. So land disputes and the bloody cost of all of this really just really is etched into the framework of the history that is all of these nations. Again, whether we're talking about Malaysia or Cambodia, each one of these are in what I'll call these days, back 2,000 years ago. In these days, all of those things are very in their infant stage and are just now being established. The Thailand that would become Thailand is being established during these times. The Malaysia that would become Malaysia, the Cambodia, the Vietnam, the Laos, each one of these places are in their very infant stage. The migrants are coming down, and I mean, perhaps even family by family and clan by clan, places are figuring out and establishing where their place would be. Oh, I mean, those are the places now that we decide borders by, and this is your border, and that's your land, and this is your border, and that's your land. Each one having very similar cultures, but also having cultures, foods, languages that are very distinct and very particular to they themselves. I mean, let me give you this example. So we have on the continent of the Americas, right? And though this is not exactly correct in its analysis, because before we came here, there were already natives who lived here, but for our day and time, let me put it to you like this. In today's day and age, maybe not 500 years ago, but in today's day and age, you have nations like Canada, the United States of America, Mexico, moving down into Belize and Central and South America, Costa Rica, moving on down into South America, where you have Peru, Ecuador, Brazil, all of these places. But each one of these places are divided by borders, whether you're talking about nations, cities, towns, each one of those nations having particular cultures, languages, food types. And the same thing can be said of this southern Asian peninsula, where, goodness sake, to a very novice individual, you might say that food from Laos and Vietnam are same as the food from Thailand, and the food from Thailand the same from that of China. But trust me, my friends, I'll put it to you like this as a Southern boy, right? Just as I can discern the difference between barbecues from Memphis and Texas and North Carolina, South Carolina, and Alabama, so these individuals can discern the different taste of their, and for me, those barbecues are very, very different. Again, being raised Italian, the different types of Italian sauces and the different regions where they come from, those things are all distinct. And why do I say all that when I'm talking about the history of Thailand? Because we need to understand that those differences, so many times individuals in this world will use those differences to separate us, when all the while those differences, though unique to our people group, in our tradition, my traditions, you know, we just celebrated Christmas a few weeks ago, where my tradition, you know, on my dad's side, being raised, my grandma being adopted and raised by Italians, which it just so happens, and again, I know I'm so diverting here, I will get to the history of Thailand, but as it happens, I was researching why so many English, Scottish, Irish, Caucasian babies were put up for adoption early in the 19th century. And well, what I found out is so many individuals, because of the Great Depression, were having to forsake their babies. They were dying. As a matter of fact, it got so tragic, so challenging, that literally places like Connecticut, New York, Boston would get all their orphan babies together and train them down. They would send them down as I don't want to say, the proper term is not slave labor, but it's more indentured slavery, where they would send them down to places that were south of there, whether you're talking about New Jersey or Virginia, over to Ohio, but places that had much more space and did not have the number of orphans. They would send these children away to be a very real form of indentured slavery, where a family down in Ohio or Jersey or Virginia would take one of these children in, would provide for them and give them schooling. It's something that I've seen so often in Haiti. They'd give food and schooling to them, but growing up, they had that term treated like a redheaded stepchild, which meant you were less of a child than the real children were. And these children were definitely less children than the real children were, and were oftentimes the ones who did most of the chores, most of the hard work, laundry, help make the food, any of the more strenuous labor. They kept that off of the backs of what I'll call their natural children. And I don't mean natural in the sense of bastard children. I mean natural in the sense of their from their own selves children. And these adopted children would often have to take on greater hardships because of that. And I only mention all that because my grandmother was one of these individuals who was adopted by Italian parents and brought up in an Italian home. And for us, we have those traditions as the Italian side. Now, I got no Italian blood in me, but I have the culture and the tradition of the Italians, where on Christmas Eve we make gnocchi and spitzadine and have aioli and just do a complete outright Italian Christmas. And then on Christmas Day, back in the day, we did my mom's side, where we did more of the ham and mashed potatoes, those kind of things. And just to be able to celebrate the diversity in cultures and traditions, I think that's one of the things that is the beauty of when you see places like Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and all these in the southern Asian peninsula, being able to look at each one, distinguish who they are, and say, man, I love that culture. I love the depth of it, the richness. And you say, but Pastor Josh, I don't know the depth. Well, let me just explain to you some of the history of Thailand, because it is incredibly fascinating. So the beginning of Thailand's history begins in or around 700 AD, after the death of Christ. And that's when we see this huge migration beginning to take place. Chinese from the north are beginning to migrate down to the unpopulated south. But really, 700 AD, things don't really begin getting too organized until around 1250, and we see the first kingdoms beginning to arise. And the establishment even of the Thai, now the migrants had lived there, the border wars had all taken place, all of this stuff, but really the establishment of the Thai kingdom, or the northern kingdom, we see the first real grasp of that in and around 1500, when Siam was Siam, right? And that was what all of Thailand was called, was Siam. And you had the northern kingdom, you had the southern kingdom, but the Atawatha ruled from central Thailand. And there, man, again, just if you can imagine the continual border wars taking place with Burma and Malaysia, each country trying to establish their own ground and what kingdom would be theirs. Finally, in 1767, we see Burma coming in and literally conquering all of the Atawa and literally destroying and taking captive, but only lasted for a very short time, because the Thais come back quickly, free themselves, and found a new state. And but from 1850 to 1900, we see Thailand gradually coming around, and their monetary value beginning to rise. We see their economy beginning to go to one that is based on money rather than, fidel slavery. And this as it takes place, the slavery was not completely abolished from Thailand until 1905. We see the rise of other monarchies, and I only bring that to bear because it was in 1872 that the current dynasty, the Chikara dynasty, came into power. And 2 years later, after they come to power, they established their kingdom from Bangkok, understanding that Bangkok is in the absolute southern part of Thailand. Chiang Mai is in the northern. And so you had the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom, and still today, they refer to Chiang Mai and its surrounding districts as the Northern Kingdom, Bangkok and its surrounding districts as the Southern Kingdom. Now, bearing that in mind, it wasn't until 1932, America winning its freedom from Britain, back when it did, and whatever, 1792 or 1768, whatever it was. It wasn't until 200-300 years, this ancient people finally, I don't want to say abolishing the monarchy, because I don't believe any nation that has, it takes any nation that does away with the monarchyship itself through peaceful manners. It takes a long time, and sometimes never do they disavow themselves from the honor of that monarch. We see this of the British people, and I'll draw this all the way back. So the United States of America, we, through our War of Independence, we broke the power of the monarch over us. And so that was a little bit different because we threw off the bondages. But other places that were given the opportunity and the choice, and through demonstration, through peaceful protests, whatever it was, these places oftentimes hold their monarchy still in a very high regard. We see this in Great Britain, where though the now King Charles, the late Queen Elizabeth, they hold immense influence over the people, yet they don't have any, though they have the power of influence, they don't have any actual power other than the power of influence. And I was speaking to a friend of mine who's from Great Britain, and he's like, the Parliament has power and the Prime Minister has power, but when the Queen speaks, the people follow. And it's like, okay. And I guess that's a real lesson in the difference between authority and power and influence, and to realize the Queen may not have the power of guns or ammunition, but she does have the influence over the people. And I believe the same thing can be said of Thailand, because though from 1932 until the present day, the previous king who died a few years back, and the now new king who is in power, though they don't have the power of parliament and perhaps army and military, they do hold sway over influence of the people, which again, I mean, sitting back and thinking about it, is a very, 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 very powerful thing. In 1949, we see the country changing its name from Siam to Thailand. And goodness sake, the Thai people have lived in ancient times, or from ancient times, in southern Thailand. They made their way south, Laos, Thailand, all the things I previously mentioned. The Mongols invaded from China in 1200s or so, and we see then the first kingdom, the Northern Kingdom, being established, and that being established in and around the cities of Chengqing, Chiang Mai, and then Sokotia, and that all being established around 1250 BC. And keep in mind, one of the unique things, the great thing about Thailand is they evaded all European, I'll say, influence and contact. The first European, the Portuguese, they came to Thailand in the 1600s, around 1550. And in the 1600, a number of traders from whether it be England or Netherlands came over, but a king, King Norari, in 1657, he reigned from 57 to 1688, forced all of the Europeans out, and that lasted until the mid 1800s. And so they were able to maintain so much of their culture. And I'll just give you an example of that. And this isn't throwing shade or anything on, but if you go to places like China, and you go to places in China such as Hong Kong or Shanghai, you can always see the European influence, the colonization influence that those nations had on those cities. You travel to places like India, so prevalent. You see the influence that was had. Obviously, America, South America, North America, you see it. You go to places like Laos, China, these places who were able to keep the European influence out, then I'll tell you what you see. You see nations and cultures that have been untarnished by other cultures and nations. And you don't see, and again, I love the beauty of East meets West, but you don't see the East meets West that you see in places like Shanghai, where you go and you walk the waterfront and it's all Queen Victorian style housing and clocks and churches and cathedrals and all these beautiful wonders, and it's beautiful. And I love to see that mixing of the East and the West coming together. But in Thailand, you don't see that. You don't see the European influence that you see in other places throughout the world. And so in that, their language, their art, even their food is, I want to say untarnished, but unblemished, no, undiluted maybe, by other cultures. And don't get me wrong, I love the dilutement. I love the mixing. I love being able to experience other cultures and friends and family and all of these things. But you see less of that. I'll give you an example. There are many African-American individuals in the United States who have clung on to their American culture. You go to places like Jamaica and Haiti, then you fly over to places in Africa, and you will see that these places that have not been influenced by America as much, I'll say as much, they have held on to a greater level of their language, their culture, their art, their food. Whereas individuals who have, mingled more, I don't want to say have lost. What I'll say is this: their culture has developed in a different way, and their foods, their art, everything has developed in a different way, where it is not as much like the original as other places in the world. And I hope that makes sense to you. Anyway, as we see the abolishment of the anarchy there in Thailand, the parliament beginning to come to be what I'll call the supreme authority. But even when Amber and I were there in 2006, we see high influence and high regard for the king and his family. Now let's go to my history with Thailand. We see back in 2006, me and my dad, Amber, we all make this trip to Thailand. We had planted several churches among the Karen people group. To date, we have planted 17 or 18 churches. We continue to support Brother Charlie, Miss Kathy in Thailand, have a great, powerful relationship with them. Absolutely love them and the powerful impact that they've had. But this is, 15, 18 years ago. Even then, we had known Charlie for 15, 16, I don't know, a long time. And I know that it was 2006 because, as I mentioned, I was prepping for my Marine Corps Marathon, which I would run in October in DC in the year 2006. And I was beginning my training, and I remember I did my first 12-miler at the end of our trip in Thailand. We were staying at a resort called Horizons, and they had these gardens that just looped and wound and were beautiful and gorgeous. And man, it was like a 4-mile trek around that thing, and I just started going, and I ran around it 3 times, and I made a mistake at the end of that run. This is the first time I'd ever run 12 miles. I think the most I'd run before that was like 7. And I just started running and didn't want to stop. And at the very end of that run, they had a saline swimming pool, and which is it's not a chlorinated swimming pool. It's one that's purified through salt. Anyway, I go and I dive into the deep end of that swimming pool after running all of that time, and I remember my entire body just seizing up. I mean, from the back of the top of my neck all the way down my back, everything just seizing up and beginning to cramp up, my arms, everything down to my very fingertips, my legs down to my toes, clenching up like this. And I lay there unable to move on the bottom of the swimming pool. And I thank God at that point that I'm such a good swimmer, because as I lay there like a rock, I'm like, okay, don't panic. You know how to hold your breath well. Hold your breath and just begin to stretch these muscles out. And then after you stretch them out, just leap off the bottom, catch your breath and you can sink again and begin to stretch those muscles out again. And doing over the course of a few minutes, I'm able to kind of work out those cramps. But I can tell you this, from that year until this and all the miles I've run, never have I done such an intense run and jumped directly into a cold swimming pool. Like I said, that was a bad mistake. I get ahead of myself though, because that's the end of our journey in Thailand. We fly into Thailand, spend a few days in Chiang Mai, ministering, teaching among Charlie's ministry training school. These young men, young women are going to be those who go out and plant churches and ministries, most of which are going to be to the unreached people groups, the people like the Quran. And we spent a few days teaching Dad's ministry training school there at Charlie's school. And it was probably 3, maybe 4 days. And and you got to know, when you're over there and you're teaching 3, 4 days, you're not teaching a 2-hour class. You're literally teaching 8-10 hours a day from morning, evening until night. And that's what we were doing. We were, training these future pastors, apostles, teachers, evangelists to go out into their unreached section of the world and minister the gospel of Jesus Christ. And finally, after that 3 or 4 days, that was kind of what I'll call the low-key educational portion of the trip. At the end of it, and really part of the reason why we were doing that, we were trying to get done a church that we had actually paid for the building of. Unfortunately, the construction was delayed. We were not able to go and dedicate that church, but there was another church that was being dedicated. So, man, we go literally, guys, over the river, through the woods. We're going through these jungles, vast, massive, going through streams, over mountains and hills, 4x4 in it. Some of the most dense jungle that I've ever seen. But I got to tell you, I didn't see Mowgli. I didn't see Shere Khan, though tigers are prevalent there. I didn't see Baloo. I saw, snakes, and I saw monkeys, and I saw huge lizards and cows and all of these things. And Charlie had told us that there had been times when he was out in these jungles and had seen things like tigers. Guys, can you imagine having traveled to Africa and seen lions and hippopotamus and elephant in their natural environment? It does not hold a candle to seeing these creatures in their natural habitat like I did on the Serengeti in Africa. So to have seen a tiger in its natural habitat, wow, that would have just been amazing. But unfortunately, not on that trip, maybe on my next one. We arrive in this, goodness sake, just this beautiful village. And it's everything you had pictured from National Geographic. The huts are built off of the ground to where there's about a 3 or 4 foot opening on stilts, and all of the houses are built that way. And so any given time you can look down through the slats in the floor and see a goat walking or a cow walking underneath the cabin, hut, whatever. And that's where we would spend the next 2 to 3 days. And of course, no indoor water. They had bathrooms outside. I called them bathrooms, but they were really outhouses. And if you've never experienced primitive Asian outhouses, let me go ahead and cue you in on something so you're not surprised about it. So in Asia, and this goes throughout most of Asia that I've been to, throughout China, like I said, Thailand and different places, they do not have commodes, that is toilets, the way that we have commodes, that is toilets. What they have instead is what's called a squatty potty. And if the name doesn't give it away, then you'll understand this is not a facility that you sit on, but a facility that you squat over. And I bring that up because Charlie, my good friend, knew I had a deep love for everything spicy. I mean, the hotter, the better. And he told the villagers where we would dedicate the church the next day, my love for spicy food. And so what do, as any good villagers who love visiting guests? They take the challenge. They serve us this rice with this sort of bok choy, and I mean, the best way to describe it was a tender twig and berry thing that we had over the rice. And they spiced these things with some Thai peppers that I promise you were sent from the seventh layer of hell. Because as I begin to eat these bad boys, I mean, I'm profusely sweating the back of my neck and the back of my head, and I'm crying. It's so good and so hot, and I'm just dying, right? And it's wonderful. I finally get to the point where I can't eat anything else other than rice because it's so spicy, so hot, and my mouth is just like dying. Anyway, as you can imagine, that level of spice when it comes to food, and you have unfamiliar facilities, well, I won't go too much into detail. Let's just say it was a, hot night. That's what we'll say. So you guys kind of get the picture. Anyway, the next day we wake up, and after waking up several times during the night and having to experience a squatty potty. Anyway, wake up the next day, I'm feeling much better. We go up to the church, enjoy the festivities, a full day of dedication and feasting and food and fun. And it's interesting, right? Because as we're beginning to wrap up the day of feasting and food and fun and praise and worship, all of these things, I am given the honor, guys. Now just imagine this, because it's such a complete honor. My dad allows me, instead of himself or Charlie, who are much more experienced, better ministers than I am at this time, and he asked me if I would preach the dedicating sermon. And guys, I mean, this was a people group I had been praying for, had adopted in my heart for probably 20 years previous to this. And I shared with him how that moment was a dream come true for me, because here I was preaching to an unreached people group that I had prayed for all of those years, and dedicated to, supported, seen churches built amongst them, and now I'm given the opportunity to minister the gospel of Jesus Christ. And it was so humbling, so honoring. I don't wish to do away with that. But it was interesting, right? Because as I'm ministering and as I'm preaching on Noah, and I'm preaching this fiery sermon of repentance, and this fiery sermon to escape the impending doom, right? And wanting to see the altars full, and wanting to see God move, and my youth and experience and pride, whatever. And it's interesting because as I'm trying to draw on their heartstrings, maybe even make them feel a little bit of remorse, right? As I'm telling, and I'm in the point of my sermon where I'm talking about the people beating on the side of the ark, pleading for mercy, pleading for help. And normally in a Western mindset, let's face it, an American mindset, right? And my naivety, I'm trying to draw on their heartstrings, and this could be us, and we need to pray for God to forgive us now while there's yet time. And the people in the crowd begin to laugh at my story. They begin to laugh at these people who are destined to doom. And I sat back, guys, and I'm like, how naive I was. And this was a pivotal moment in my life. How foolish, naive, young, immature, all of those things I was, and I perhaps still am, to think that the same things that are going to draw on the heartstrings, my heartstrings, or other individuals like me, would draw on theirs. I was, like I said, incredibly immature, because what I should have done is really more intensely sought God and asked him, what should I speak about? And not simply think of how honoring this was to me, because that made it about me. And again, it's still an honor to have been able to minister there, but that moment was not about me and the honor that it was to me. That moment was about God, and how I should have sought him more in order to better be able to relate. And I hope I learned that lesson well and have gone on from there. Anyway, next day we head back to Chiang Mai in the Northern Kingdom, and again, just the richness, the beauty, the wonder of it all. And spend the next 2 days or so at the Horizons Ecological Resort, where, again, that's where I ran the 12 miles, dove into the pool. And man, guys, just what a great time that was. Me and my wife would tour outside the ecological retreat, and there was these rice paddies with water buffaloes, and I walked up, petted this huge, massive probably the size of well, I don't want to say a 15-passenger van, but definitely the size of a minivan. Water buffalo. Spent time in their gardens where they had just beautiful trees and flowers and monkeys and just all the wonders of nature. As a matter of fact, I spent 1 or 2 days in culinary classes where we learned from a Thai chef some of the more intricate details of how to cook Thai food, things that I still utilize today in my cooking. We walked the streets of and markets of Chiang Mai. Man, I remember these sausages that were dried out, and you eat them with a pepper and this green paste spicy sauce that was so good. I remember getting some of the best foot massages of my life and picking up Armani suits for pennies on the dollar. I mean, just incredibly having them tailored there. Still have some of those suit coats now. And I say all that to say this, man, I got to tell you, I hope this year or next I have the opportunity once again to go to Chiang Mai to minister among the Karen people and just experience the depth, the beauty, the wonder of their culture, the people there, the language, the art, and just be fully immersed in all of it. Anyway, guys, it's about all the time I have for today. Thank you for joining me. Let me encourage you, as I have told this story, go out there and experience life to the fullest, to the best of your ability. Remember, like, share, subscribe. You guys know the deal. And until next time, get out there and live life with all you've got.